Alright, so lesson 16, Slim for Authentication. We are going to set up better debugging and actually use the compiled or rendered blade templates as our log errors. And then we're going to do some minor refactors in preparation for our upcoming lessons. So our upcoming lessons, we're about to get deep, so I really want to make sure we're set up so we can focus on what we're focusing on in the following lessons. So to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Bootstrap, Foundation, we're going to go to Load Debugging Page. Now we're using this new whoops middleware, right? But if we add this whoops middleware to our container as like this, and we do like whoops, and then we do new whoops middleware, then we can do something like this, where we say app resolve, and then we can do resolve whoops, right? And so we're going to set up our middleware to actually be registerable as strings. The reason we're going to do this is because there's some third-party packages that specifically our CSRF lesson coming up, where we have to reference as a string, and we don't want to lose the ability to reference as our class path. So to get started, we just need to refactor our middleware. And so to do that, we need to go to support, and we need to go to route group. And so the first thing we need to do is we want to change this right here in route group. The register method says array walk this middleware. Well, first, let's clean that up. We added collection sent in. So let's add collect this middleware. And then we're going to do function and each function guard. And then we're going to say group add. And then we're going to use our global helper. I guess we can use this app. This app resolve. And then we're going to say middleware. So, or guard, just like that. We're going to replace this. So now we're not newing up. We're not depending on the fact that we have a class path. We can actually resolve middleware from our container. But to get this set up, we also need to bind all of our middleware that's defined in our kernel. We need it right now, it's only one. But we need to bind all of our middleware where the class path is the key. And when we resolve the class path key from our container, it will return a new instance. So to get this set up, we're going to go to Bootstrap Foundation. We're going to do load HTTP middleware. And again, we're just going to do a little bit of cleanup here because we've refactored some of this since setting up our load HTTP middleware. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to say resolve kernel class. After that, we're going to say kernel, and then we're going to do, it's going to be middleware. And then we're just going to say middleware is going to be that. We're going to say kernel middleware, and I believe that is middleware groups. And that's going to be API. And then we're going to do kernel middleware groups web. Just like that. After that, we're going to collect our middleware. And we're going to filter through each of our middleware. We're going to say if the class exists, if it's a class path, then we want to filter by that. We only want to get the middleware that we're using class paths for. So to give you an idea, what we're saying is once we add like the CSRF in a later lesson, right now we're filtering to only get class paths. It won't give us CSRF because that's already binded to our service container. So we only want the class paths. All right, so after that, we're simply going to say for each guard, we want to bind, and the guard is the middleware class path. We want to bind the class path as the key, and the resolution, what we resolve when we reference that key from our container, will be a new instance of the middleware class. All right. Then, after that, we can just refactor this and just say bind. So now we are properly able to add CSRF as the key, which we will do in a later lesson. Okay, so after that, I want to also add a new console command. And so this console command is going to be to clear our blade cache. So all it's going to do, remember that our blade templates, our templating engine that we're using, it has a cache path. So these are our compiled blade templates right here, right? They're just PHP, but sometimes they don't update how we want to, or they get behind. The cache isn't up to date with our most recent changes. And so what we want to do is we want to create this ViewClear command. Now this ViewClear command is going to extend command, and then we're going to say protected name is going to be ViewClear. Protected description is going to be remove cache for view templates. And then we want to do our handler. And this is not going to take any arguments, so we don't need to add our getArguments function. But what we do need to do is we need to resolve a file system. So I'll set it up this way at first. We're going to use a new file system, and then we're going to say the path to our blade cache files, to our cached blade files, is config blade.cache, and we want to throw when there is no path with an error of views cache path not found. After that, we want to use the runtime exception class. So this will be a runtime exception when we error out. Finally, we're going to collect our files from our path using our file system and glob our path along with any files in that path. And then for each file, for each cached view, we want to delete the cached view. Just like that, and let's do this. Okay. So we're getting our file system, we're getting our blade path. We're confirming that we have a blade cache path. If we don't, we throw an exception. Otherwise, we use our file system instance to collect all the cached blade files. We iterate over them, and we delete each file by doing delete cached view. If it's successful, we'll say this info cached views cleared successfully. After that, we will of course go to our console kernel, and we will add our new command. And we'll do ViewClear command class, just like that. And then we're going to pull up our terminal, and we're going to see if it works. So remember, right now we have our cache blade files. They're all right here. If we run this command, ViewClear, these should all be gone. And they are. So our command is properly set up. We can now clear our view, cached view templates. And so that will be helpful when we start writing custom blade directives for the CSRF or for errors or old request input form population. There's two more things. First one is I want to have some foundation, Bootstrap foundation service providers. So I'm going to say providers, and then I'm going to actually copy the service provider class, just like this. And I'm going to add that to our foundation providers. So we're going to say service provider, and we'll call this Slim service provider. We'll scroll up, and we'll say Slim service provider. Then we need to change our namespace. That's going to be boot foundation providers. All right. After that, I want to remove register and boot. Those are not required in our foundation. But what we are going to do is we're going to remove everything in our in our apps provider, or app provider, service provider, except those two, register and boot. So we're going to say extends and then slim service provider. After that, I want to add a new, we're going to call this, I'll actually add all of our providers we're going to add. So we're going to add a blade service provider. We're going to add a new route service provider. And so our app support providers will extend these providers. And we're going to add a new file system service provider. Okay, these are all going to extend the slim service provider. And so within our slim service provider, our file system, all we're going to do is we're going to do public function, and we're going to do boot, and then we're simply going to say this app bind, and we're going to do file system, and we want this one right here. We're going to say new file system. And we'll actually put that in a register. All right, next, and the reason we're going to do that is so in our command right here, we can now do files equals app resolve file system class. Just like that. So now that is properly resolving once we register our file system service provider. Okay, so after that, we want to go to our base service provider. And what we want to do is within our base service provider, we want to add the ability to optionally hook in to our service provider before registering. And this is going to be this before registering. So all we're saying is if the method exists before registering, then call it. And the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to have to refactor our blade templates to allow us to use our CSRF token properly. And so we want to say blade extends the slim service provider. We're going to have a public blade property. We're going to do public function before registering. This blade is going to equal this resolved blade class. And then we're going to have to bind the blade class within our blade bootstrapper. Then we're going to say blade is a reference to this blade. And then if method exists, this directives, then we are going to pass that reference through to the directives class. After that, we're going to rebind or override our previous bind with our blade class and rebind blade. Then we're going to say this blade equals this app resolve blade class. Okay, so the reason we did this is because if we go back up to our providers, and we go to our blade service provider, first we're going to want to use the blade service provider from our foundation. And we'll use that as service provider. After that, what we want to do is we want to do public function directives. We're going to say blade, then we want to say like blade directive hello, and then it will allow us to do something like and these get funky, but they're also really, really helpful. Echo hello world. And so it will allow us to add our own custom directives. Now, what does this do? Well, we added a directive of hello, and then we returned a PHP expression. So once we have this set up, which we'll finalize in the next video, we'll be able to do like @hello. And just by doing this blade directive, it will automatically echo hello world, because that's our expression right here. Whenever we use the hello directive, it automatically executes this PHP expression. So what we're actually going to do, we're not going to obviously use hello. We want to add this @CSRF directive. And that will add 2 input fields that will validate that we're not being hacked through a cross-site forgery hacking thing. So it will be a security thing. But for now, we'll just say add custom blade directives. All right, then we'll go down here and we'll do this app bind the view class, and then we're going to say function, and it's going to be response factory, and then it's going to be blade, and we need to use blade, so blade factory, and that's going to be new view blade factory. All right. So then we can remove this, and that will properly work. So now what we're doing is we're just saying, okay, one, we want to not set up our blade stuff here. We don't want the end developer, which is honestly like an end user, to be able to accidentally mess some of that up. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new bootstrapper called load blade templates. This is of course going to extend our bootstrapper, and then within our boot function, we're simply going to say, okay, blade equals new blade, import that with the config blade views path, and then the config blade cache path. After that, we are going to simply say, this app bind the blade class to blade, just like that. So now what we're doing is we're actually instantiating our blade here and binding it to the container. Then within our base, our foundational service provider, right here, we're resolving this blade, we're using a reference, and then we're adding or passing it to the directives method. And so we can add custom directives by simply going to our app providers blade service provider, and we can just do blade directive. And we don't have to return anything, we don't have to worry about anything, it is just set up to add custom directives. Okay, so after that, we want to actually register this view class. And so this view class now needs to know about blade and needs to know about the response factory. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the support, and we're going to go to view. Then here we are going to accept the response factory interface, and then we're going to expect the Yessinger's blade template. We're going to change this to protected. We're going to change this to protected, and we'll refactor that a bit, and then we'll simply say this blade equals blade. All right. So then after that, we no longer need to define our cache path in there, and we no longer need to say new blade. We already have blade. So what we want to do is we want to do this blade make template with the given data render. And then we're simply going to say view is that. We're going to get our response body and write the view, and we're going to return our response. So now we have the ability to hook into blade and do things like add the directive. So pretty cool stuff there. The next thing we need to do is we're going to go to the route service provider. And we're going to extend the boot foundation providers and then route service provider. We're just going to do a little bit of refactoring here that will just clean this this provider up for the end user, the end developer. We want to do all of our funky stuff. We kind of want to hide it behind the layer of Bootstrapper Foundation. Obviously, you don't want to really be hiding anything, but at the same time, like setup app, this bind route group, like this really shouldn't be here. This is literally all we want. We just want to say register our route groups, register our routes. We just want to finalize or register specific settings about our router. We don't want to know how it's actually set up. We just want to customize it within our app providers. With our foundational providers and within our bootstrappers, that's where we want to do all of our lower level customization. We're going to do slim service provider, and then we're going to do public function, and then we're going to do before registering. So by doing before registering, by adding this hook, it's not going to get overridden in these providers up here. And then we're just going to bind grout group to the new grout, and voila. So we're good to go there. So we have our Blade service provider set up. We have our file system service provider set up. We have our route service provider set up. We're extending Blade and we're extending route. We still need to use the file system service provider. So what we'll do is we'll go to config app and we'll say app service providers. And then right here we'll say foundation, bootstrapped, booted foundation service providers. Then we're simply going to say /boot foundation, and then it's going to be providers, and then /file system service provider class. Just like that. So now we have our booted foundation service providers, and we have our app service providers. Examples of our booted foundation service providers will be like setting up our translator service for multiple languages, setting up our validator service, and a few more. But those are really the big ones. So if we go back here, and now if we go and use our kernel, because we added the new load templates, right? Load blade templates. So what we want to do is we want to load our HTTP middleware, and then we want to load our blade templates. And we're actually going to add this to our console middleware, sorry, our console kernel as well. The reason being is we don't ever really know when we'll need to access that, because we could have some certain console commands that interact directly with what we register within load blade templates. And again, all that's doing is that's just saying new blade, and then setting up the config, and then it's registering or binding blade to the container. Okay, we're almost there. So next what we want to do is we want to go back to our slim service provider, and we want to go to our final public static setup function. So we can clean this up, and we're actually referencing the wrong service provider now. So what we can do is we can do collect, and then we're going to say providers, and then we're simply going to say map, and we're going to say map the given provider to the new provider instance where it has access to app. After that, loop through each provider and run the provider register hook, but we need to actually accept an instance of slim service provider because everything extends from slim service provider now. So then we're going to do slim service provider one more time, and then we're going to do provider boot. Just like that. Okay, so now that that is set up, I think we should be good to go. So if we reload our page, call on find file system boot and slim service provider. Okay. This is because we need to add our boot function. So we can either add it here, or we can go back here and we can say this: if when exists, we're going to say execute or run when exists, and we'll do method, we'll say function, method, we'll do provider method, and then we'll simply say method exists on the provider, then just do method or provider method. Otherwise, don't do anything and do null. And that needs a $sign. So what we're saying is run when exists. So run when, and we'll just do provider register exists. And so this just allows us to optionally add or remove the boot methods as we see fit, and So that's actually the reason I originally made those abstract. Within our foundational service providers, we're not going to be using them all the time, so I'm not making them abstract. But hopefully that does it. Okay, so this is the last thing. We did get the error. I noticed, and I thought this was something else for a while, but whoops, the debugging thing we have set up, is kind of being a pain. I'm not sure what the error is. I do know what the error is. It's this one. I've tried raising the PHP memory level. I've tried. I spent a few hours on this last night. So, because I wasn't actually able to figure out exactly how to fix this memory exhaustion issue, I actually found a pretty cool debugging solution, and it does use whoops. So here's how it works. We want to go to our load debugging page, and within our load debugging page, we're going to create our own custom debugger. We need to create a callback function. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to say whoops equals function. It's going to be exception, inspector, and run. After that, we're going to say message equals exception get message. Then we're going to say title equals inspector get exception name. And then we are going to just continue on and add several different things. We're going to do exception get trace. And then we're going to do blade equals this app resolve our blade class. Semicolon. After that, we're going to do input equals. It's going to be this app resolve request input class. Then we're going to do all. After that, we're going to say with compact, and then it's going to be exception, inspector, run, title, message, input, and stack. I really like how this turned out. I think you guys will like it too. So we're going to say debug page equals blade make exceptions. Whoops. We have not made that blade template yet, but then we'll render it. After that, we're going to say the time is, we're going to use carbon to get now. And we're going to say path is kiob. And then we're going to say storage path error logs. And then we're going to say time. And we're going to say title.html. After that, we're going to resolve our file system. Then we're going to say file system, put path, and it's going to be debug page. And we're going to echo our debug page, and then we're going to exit. Okay. So after that, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in parameters to our whoops middleware. We're going to pass in this right here. And so what this is doing is we're hooking into whoops, we're getting the exception that was thrown, we're getting the inspector itself so we can get the information we want, and then we're getting the runtime. And so we're just getting a whole bunch of information, and then we're creating a blade template, and then we're actually going to create another directory within, where's that going to be, storage path? We're going to call it error logs. And so now we actually need to create our exception whoops blade template. So we're going to go to views, we're going to go to exceptions, and then we're going to say new, and then whoops.blade.php. The branch I've got with this code. So if we're on authorized slim 4, and if we go to experimental session, that's the branch, experimental session. And then we go to our resources, and we go to views, we go to exceptions, and whoops. We're just going to copy this verbatim. And so once we copy that, we can go back here, and it's just going to be a pretty whoops page. Also notice there is a Vue template. I'm going to comment that out for now. We're going to use that Vue component though here in a sec. Okay, so now that we have that set up, let's try to go to SlimAuth and watch it break. So boot foundation, bootstrappers blade. So it looks like we forgot to use our blade. So I'm guessing that's right here. And where do we use that? Alright, so we're using blade right there. Ooh, we actually forgot a few imports. So we need to do blade. We need to do request input. We need to do string. And I think that should do it. Okay. So now when we reload our page, here's our new error page. But what's really, really cool about this is you can customize. You can show the information you want. I personally like showing the request input. And so if I log out, I try to log back in, must implement interface, response factory interface. So now let's do zach.horton@cleancode.studio secret. Home dashboard, okay. So now the question is, how do we actually trigger our error page? And instead of returning this redirect, let's return an array. This will make it error out. So when we log out, and we go back here and we try to log back in, exception request input, email, password, just like that. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you guys is we have a new View component, our whoops.blade page. So if we go right here, and you can add on to this as you feel fit, you can add whatever information you want to get. But what we can do is we can use our stack trace View component. So if we go to resources, JS, we're going to do components, create a new directory, call this exceptions. And then within exceptions, we're going to create a new file. We're going to call it stacktrace.view. We're going to do template. And then we'll do script, export default. And honestly, this lesson's going on a bit longer than I thought it was, so I'm just going to copy this as well from that GitHub. And then authorize slim4. Go to the session/experimental or experimental/session branch. We're going to go to resources, JS, components, exceptions. And call trace here, we'll call stack trace. Alright, so all we're going to do is we're going to add this class right here, and it's just a table of our stack trace, the debugging stack trace. But then we also log the stack to the console so we can look at it more dynamically. After that, we will of course go and import that component, and that is going to be the stack trace component from components, exceptions, stacktrace.view. We're going to do view.component stacktrace, stacktrace. After that is done, I already have it booted up, but you'll want to run, here I'll do it with you guys, npm run watch. Log back in again and we'll throw the error because we're still returning an array. Okay, so now we have the stack trace. More than that, we also have the trace in our console. And so now we can go through our stack trace through our console and just look at it in a more dynamic way. We can use JavaScript to search through our stack trace and just debug in a much better way. But my favorite part about all of this is, remember in our load debugging page or bootstrapper that we were doing file system, put the file system to the debug page. We have the date and the type of error, and we also have the entire setup so we can go and find this code or these debug pages and actually open them in our browser. It does need a little bit of work as far as setting up the proper path, and to fix that, what we can do is we can go to app.blade.php, and then we can just go let's go assets, and then asset with js/main.js. Okay, so asset is going to be a global helper function we'll add real quick. So we'll scroll up, we'll add asset, and we'll do if no function exists, asset, then function asset path is going to return, and is going to be env app URL, or and then dot path. And so now this will no longer use a relative path, so if we want to open these, we can. So if we go and reload that, log back out, and this will be the last thing we log in. There we go. And then we go, and now we can open this file in the browser and it will properly work. And then we'll go tutorials, authorize slim 4, and then we're going to do storage slash, and we'll just go there, air logs, and then the most recent, and voila. We can now send not only our air, but our entire setup, our debug stack trace, as a static HTML file for somebody to open in the browser. So that's our new debug page. You can add and remove stuff as you want. I really like the setup. So yeah, guys, I hope you enjoy it. And again, you can always add more stuff. There's tons and tons of information that you can get specific to what you usually end up debugging. So again, that's going to be Bootstrap, Foundation, Bootstrappers, load debugging page. We have the exception, the inspector, and run. So you can get just about any information you want to get. So really cool stuff, guys. That's all I got for today. That is our refactoring, our setup. In these next 4 lessons, we have them planned out. We're going to do CSRF tokens next, and the CSRF blade directive to prevent cross-site forgery. After that, we're going to set up validation. And to set up validation, we actually need to set up translators, ironically. So validations and translators for like different languages. The one after that, we're going to set up a better session. We're going to use Symfony's session and extend it. And then we're going to continue to the next lesson where we're going to flash specific error messages. Flashing just means we're only showing it in the next request. After the next request, the flash errors will disappear. It will no longer be in the session. The lesson after that is going to be populating input fields with old input values. So we've got a lot set up. This is a good foundational base. Sorry this one was long, but the next ones are going to be a lot more concise and to the point, and I think you guys will like them. So stay tuned. Simpler.